Welcome to the African News Review podcast, where we cut through the noise and get to the truth. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and each week we are here to challenge the biases, prejudices, and misinformation in the Western press about Africa. Using historical context and contemporary insights, we set the record straight and reclaim the narrative. Tune in every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we uncover the real stories and reshape the conversations about Africa. This is the African News Review podcast, reclaiming Africa's narrative, one story at a time. Yes, welcome to African News Review, our weekly conversation in which we take a look at the coverage of Africa and its larger diaspora in the Western media and deconstruct the stories for you. I'm your host, Adesoji Iginla, and with me, as usual, is Brother Milton Allimadi, journalist, publisher, Black Star News, author of Manufacturing Hate. This book might actually come in handy now. How Africa was demonized in the Western media. I enjoy you to get a copy. I saw 2 copies on Amazon, so if you're quick enough, you might get it. So, yes, welcome, Brother Milton.
Asante sana. Thank you.
Again, joining us this week from last week, it seems folks cannot get enough of our sister's positive and passionate vibes. And she is Mrs. Aya Fubara Eneli, Esquire, author of Amazon's best-selling book, Self-Love Revolution, and host of Rethinking Freedom, a YouTube channel. And she is putting in the work, as we'll say. She recently did a deep dive on Project 2025 on our channel, which is an aspect of the news we will be delving in today. So, sister, you're welcome.
Thank you so much. As my people say, me bam. Thank you.
Okay. And yes, the die has been cast. So the United States has elected its first convicted felon as its face of the world, and to which the world looks and probably wondering what is going on here. So, but to understand, I will go for our first story in the Financial Times, which is the money paper of the world. And it reads, the MAGA court. And there you see them?
Yes.
So it reads, nibbling on crabs, sushi, and sugar cookies, some of the richest and soon-to-be most powerful people in the world waited for the election results on Tuesday night at Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump's gilded fortress on the sea. At one of the tables, Trump sat with Elon Musk, the billionaire technology executive, and Dana White, chief executive of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. The next day, it was confirmed that Republican has defeated Kamala Harris. Trump and Musk ate together on the terrace of the resort, with Musk wearing a t-shirt of astronauts walking on the moon with Mars in the distance. Musk wrote on X, the Latin expression for a new era is born. Before we go further, let me just get your initial take on what that means. Let's start with our guest, Sister Aya.
So the song playing in my head now is by Wu-Tang Clan. I'm not a singer or a rapper, but there's a verse that says, cash rules everything around me. Cream, get the money. Dollar bill, y'all.
Yeah,
So listen, capitalism is going to capitalize.
Right.
It's never about democracy. It's never about humanity. It's not even. It's about making money. It's about consolidating power. And while people have their eye and justifiably so on Trump, and Project 2025, we really need to be paying attention to Elon Musk, who's definitely positioned himself as the most powerful man in the world. With his money, with his access to Donald Trump and his ability to manipulate him, Elon Musk put in, as far as we know at this point, over $172 million into buying this election. Brother, you don't make that kind of investment without expecting a
Altruistically.
return on that investment.
Right.
So what do I think about the nibbling on crab and
Sushi.
sushi and sugar cookies? Well, those who are going to harvest the crabs and make the sushi and harvest the sugar cane and process it and all of that, get ready, because there are lots of parties to be had and you are on the menu.
Brother Milton.
Yeah, well, this headline is something we actually discussed, if you remember last week. I told you, I said I had a billionaire friend whom I know who's very generous with wisdom, but has not so far demonstrated that same generosity with his money. This is it's almost what he said is prescient. It's coming to fruition. It's being materialized. He warned that you cannot sustain a society without a middle class. He said he made his money beginning in the 1980s when there was still a middle class in this country. He said today there's only him and everybody else. And that graphic that you showed is showing his class. And then there's no need to discuss everybody else because they're out there. They don't qualify to be in that type of article. But if he is correct in his assessment, then it means that we will have major social upheaval going forward. The only redeeming aspect could be that in the next 4 years, they will cause so much havoc in terms of cutting social programs, in terms of cutting taxes for the very wealthy, in terms of making it so hard for people that are already hard pressed, that indeed there will be so much chaos on the streets that in 4 years' time, people will be much more easier to be mobilized to throw this team out in 4 years' time. That's the only hopeful assessment that I can give. But in terms of everything going for the wealthy, the very wealthy from now on, that's already demonstrated in terms of the people who financed him, the way the sister just laid it out. And they're not going to finance you for no reason. They will come to cash their investments. There's going to be removal of all sorts of regulations, right? Even those that actually ensure safety on products and services. So if you have Elon Musk as pretty much your right-hand man, as the sister said, that spells trouble for any regulatory authorities going forward. So that's my initial assessment.
Okay.
If I may add to that really quickly, because I know we have a lot of stories to cover, and they all dovetail into each other. Yes, it could possibly portend a social upheaval like what we haven't witnessed in more recent history. However, I'm also looking at social media and technology and its use to manipulate people's minds and their opinions and they ultimately then act on that. And in that picture that you showed, if you want to scroll back up to that picture, you have J.D. Vance, who actually rose to fame writing about the poverty that he came out of. He called himself his family hillbillies.
Yeah, the hillbillies
And yet
energy.
he's in this group now, also signaling, but if you play your card right as a hillbilly, as a poor Negro, as a poor Latino, construction worker, whatever, you too could ascend to this. So I'm wondering if that isn't also a message that for those of you who are still struggling with poverty, it's because you haven't figured out how to play the game. Now,
So
never mind that there will only be 1 or 2 seats
Yes.
for people like you. But if all the millions are clamoring to be that 1 or 2, then that can potentially prevent them from coming together. And then the other thing I would point out is
That's a good point, and I'm going to add to that, but go ahead.
Where in the world have we seen people struggling under these massive inequalities, and yet we have not seen that social upheaval? So I'm going to raise Nigeria as an example. And I'm going to talk about a conversation that I had very briefly with a bookseller when I was visiting in September. We were trying to buy books for a school that we are trying to support over there. Not we are trying. We are supporting. We are keeping that school going. And I'm trying to bargain with her over the prices of the things we're purchasing, and she says, "I'm sorry, I can't go lower than that." And she said, that they just increased prices of fuel because the fuel subsidy was removed the day that I got to Nigeria. So prices skyrocketed like 3 times what they were overnight, literally. And I said, when is it going to be enough? And she says, damn, we are Nigerians. We manage. And because we always figure out a way to manage, they will always be able to do this to us because we just continue to figure out how to manage. So I'm hopeful for this social upheaval. I'm hopeful for people realizing that they're voting against their interests. But when women did not stand up in mass after Roe v. Wade was overturned, when
White
we
women.
still went to work business as usual the next day, and then turned around in this election and voted for this person, I don't know, sirs.
Actually,
I don't know.
I wasn't surprised about that part. I suspected white women would stand with the European man. So
They've
that
always
part didn't.
done that.
Exactly. So that didn't shock me. But on the other issues that you raised, an economist, I believe his name was Veblen, from back in the day, maybe 1920s or 30s, wrote that this is the one country in the world where the possibility of socialism not taking strong root is the belief by the masses that one day they can also hit the jackpot and win the lotto. They also aspire for that American dream. And that propaganda has been so effective in keeping the lid down. However, there's a limit when this corporate and monopoly finance capital becomes too greedy. And when there are economic cycles like the Great Depression, right? That was a moment when radical parties were actually taking root. And had, I might submit, the federal government not intervened with all those social programs, this would be a very different country today in the United States. So yes, people tend to be complacent, but there arrives a limit. And these guys, this team that we just saw on that graphic, I think are able to push this country to that limit. And then the other point, in terms of African countries, yes, we have too much complacency rather, in many African countries. But in those settings, there are also limits. Kenya reached the limit last year when this IMF World Bank imposed dictates in order to repay the loans that they took. They are just squeezing too much out of the people. And the youth said, no, enough is enough. We have nothing to lose. And they came out of the streets. I see signs of that already beginning in Uganda. I can see that possibly happening in South Africa with Elon Musk, as we discussed last week. I think South Africa, which has been going backward since the last election with this alliance with the ANC and the Democratic Alliance, a government, I call it a government of national dysfunction. I don't think it's going to last for the entire term, personally. But it actually could last now with Elon Musk and U.S. intervention, right? They can get more capital invested so they can appease the masses a little bit more, make a lot of more rich people, black elite, but they're not going to address the issues of the masses, the people represented by parties like Julius Malema's party. So it's interesting to see how that's going to unfold in South Africa. I think South Africa is going to be.
So speaking of masses, we go to our next story, which is that Black people in the United States have been receiving some very uncomfortable text. And this story comes from The Guardian. It's headlined, Black people across the U.S. receive racist text messages after Trump's win. The FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, is investigating after people report texts saying they were selected to pick cotton and go to nearest plantation. The story is filed by Adrian R. Walker. Just hours after Donald Trump's election win on Tuesday, Black people across the U.S. reported receiving racist text messages telling them they've been selected to pick cotton and needed to report to the nearest plantation. While the texts, some of which were signed a Trump supporter, varied in detail, they all conveyed the same essential message about being selected to pick cotton. Some of the messages referred to the recipients by name. A spokesman for the president-elect told CNN that his campaign had nothing to do with the messages, and it's not clear yet who is behind said messages, nor is there a comprehensive list of the people to whom the messages were sent. But social media posts indicate the messages were widespread. Black people in states including Alabama, South Carolina, Georgia, New York, New Jersey, Nevada, the DC area, and elsewhere reported receiving the messages. The messages were sent to Black adults and students, including high schoolers in Massachusetts and New York, and students at historical Black colleges and universities, referred to as HBCU, such as Alabama State and other schools, including one across Ohio, Clemson University. And you can see an example of what the text looked like. It says, "Greetings, you've been selected to pick cotton at nearest plantation. Be ready at 12 a.m. November 13, 2024. Sharp with your belongings," and it goes into all that other nonsense. Authorities, including the FBI and Attorney Generals, are investigating the message. The FBI is said to be aware. Now, this is quite troubling, considering the rhetoric that was around the election, pre-election. Is this something that was in the cards anyway, regardless of what the outcome of was, or it's indicative of what is to come? Sister, please, you go first.
Well, not surprised by the text messages. A friend of mine, her daughter received that text message. She goes to a private school here in Texas. What has been interesting is the response that I'm hearing back from certain people. But the truth of the matter is we've been on this plantation picking cotton already. There's a book that was written called The $40 Million Slave. It was talking about NFL players, Black NFL players. We saw what happened with Colin Kaepernick. But what are we talking about in terms of, it doesn't have to be the proverbial, okay, now we're on it's marked plantation and they're cotton plants and you're picking cotton. When you look at the economic, the economic gap, the wealth gap between Black and white folk, we've been on these plantations. Some of us are making enough to pay our bills, but now with some of the changes with DEI, if they have this mass firing of federal workers, it's going to hit the Black community hard because there are a lot of federal workers who are Black and brown people. We've never made the kind of money that we should have made given our work. We're still talking about reparations in this country. This text message is just them saying the quiet part out loud, but they have been. I mean, when the stocks have gone up for private prisons, the elites are also saying the same thing. They may not have sent a text when actually another person that I know just got information. He happens to be Latino, and the company that they had a contract with and all of that said, hey, our contract now is going to end at the end of 2024. We're renegotiating everything in 2025. Wow. And we no longer have to pay you what we had been paying you before. So in a lot of ways, we're going to get these text messages, whether we're paying attention to them or not. The question I have for people who look like me is, what are we going to do about it? But yes, I mean, from the campaign stage, Trump and his people said all of this. You talked about a floating island of garbage. Yeah. So this text is not surprising. And anyone who is feeling outraged now, but didn't before, I don't know where you've been.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have anything to add to what the sister said. She captured all the most critical elements of it. I think if you're anybody surprised by that message, that person has not been living in this country and knows nothing about this country and cares nothing about this country. The only thing I can say is that personally, I have like a built-in instinct, and I know that most people, African descendants, even if you want to deny your Africanity, I know we all have built-in instincts for self-preservation, self-protection. We know spaces where we should be. We know spaces to avoid. Whether you have the right to be there or not, sometimes your better judgment for self-preservation becomes overwhelming, and that should continue. So now those instincts should be even much more heightened now for the next 4 years. Given the people who are spewing all these blatant, explicit, racist rhetoric during their campaigns have been elected to the White House. It just means that instinct for self-preservation and guarding yourself, you should just elevate it to the next level. That's the only thing I can add to what the sister said.
Speaking of...
I'm waiting for the text message to women. Get back into the kitchen, have your babies, and shut the F up.
Just taking a quick break here on the African News Review podcast, but don't go anywhere. If you're enjoying our deep dive into the real stories behind the headlines, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern, we're here to debunk the myths and bring you the truth about Africa. Want to help spread the word? Share this podcast with your friends and leave us a review. It goes a long way in helping others discover the real Africa. Without further ado, let's get back to setting the record straight.
Right. And in fact, that message is actually going to be much more powerful because they're now going to add to it that, after all, he won the white women's vote. So they could not have been that displeased by what he was saying. It's just outrageous,
But yeah, speaking of renegotiating, apparently Trump's very presence in the White House has sent the business community jittery, and to the point where they are getting their houses in order as far as tariffs is concerned. And for the next story, we go to the Grey Lady, the New York Times. And with it, the headline reads...
Men run the New York Times. Why is it called the Lady? Don't get us involved in y'all's mess. You guys take all the credit. The gray man. No women running the New York Times.
Right.
But Milton, you want to explain why it's called the Grey Lady?
I know. She knows. She's just teasing, This is but that's a good point she makes, The Grey Lady... The Grey Lady, it's been run by white European men for decades.
Mm-hmm.
They've had maybe 1 or 2
editors,
women top editors, no more than 3 or 4 and this paper was founded in 1851. So I agree with her 100%. They should not shift the blame for the New York Times, any miscoverages to any Grey Lady.
So the headline reads, a gray man. The headline with Trump's tariffs looming, business try to run from a moving target. Companies are filling their warehouses or looking into moving factories as they weigh President-elect Donald Trump's jade threats to impose tariffs on foreign goods. And the story was filed by Anna Swanson. Rick Muscat woke up on Monday morning after the election with an urgent task. He's got his agent in China on the phone at 4:30 a.m. Beijing time and pressed him to ask their factory how many more pairs of men's dress shoes they could make before Chinese New Year at the end of January. I told them if they could make an additional 30,000 pairs, we would take that, Mr. Muscat, the co-owner of a shoe company called Dead Stag, said on Thursday. The impetus was not a sudden jump in demand for shoes, but the looming threat of steep tariffs on Chinese products. By stockpiling now, Mr. Muscat reckoned his company would avoid at least some of the levies that President Trump had promised to impose when he takes office. We're going to take whatever they can make. The election of Donald Trump is already cascading through global supply chains, where companies are grappling with his promises to remake international trade by raising the tariffs the United States puts on foreign products. Mr. Trump had floated a variety of plans, including a 10 to 20% tax on most foreign products and a 60% tariffs on goods from China that will raise the surcharge American importers pay to a level not seen in generations. There's a part here I highlighted. Okay, yeah. As we head into the second Trump's term, all eyes are kind of what they plan to do, and then how will obviously impact our cost, which will impact our consumer, he said.
Let me rewrite it. As we head into a second Trump term, all eyes are kind of on what they plan to do, and then how that will obviously impact our costs, which then will impact our profits. They're not concerned about the consumer. Let's just be clear about that.
Correct. Yep.
Yes.
Consumers
Continue.
are part of the cost of production, right?
Yes. It's your okay. My understanding here, looking here, is if the United States does not take, okay, let's start from here. As at present, China needs to stay at an economic growing rate of, I think it's 7.9%. So if those goods do not find their way into the American market, and the African market cannot absorb those products, it means the European market will be forced to bear the cost. So while some people might think electing Trump is a good thing for them, for the Americans, I mean, as in, two middle fingers up, but it impacts global trade, and also a destabilized China is not good for the region as well. You want to add?
My only take on this is that this is a potential opportunity for some African countries. If some of these U.S. manufacturers can relocate to a couple of African countries that are already taking advantage of the AGOA, the Growth and Opportunity Act, that congressional legislation, which I don't remember how many more years is still valid before it expires. So if they can relocate within the timeline and start manufacturing from those countries, that would be a benefit for African countries. And because they need it desperately the most, I think Africa's share of global trade, I forget how low it is, probably less than 3%.
I think it's
less
about
than 3%. I think if you have time, you can look it up, but it's abysmal. So this could be an opportunity, actually, for African countries. In terms of
industrialization,
businessmen being concerned about Trump, well, there are many who are actually very happy and not concerned at all because, for example, Elon Musk is now $20 billion richer because his stock just, catapulted and went up. And many companies, are in the same position. Their shares shot up dramatically. The CEOs are happy. The board is happy. The people that are going to be getting the dividends are happy. So the elite will have it good for some time. But at the same time, you cannot have an elite where the majority taking such big hits, especially when you combine it with the impending cuts in social spending. I see significant upheaval within the next 4 years.
When you say significant upheaval,
okay, so for example, it could not necessarily be triggered because somebody's sitting at home, and that's not how it's normally triggered, and saying, you know what, I can't pay my rent. I'm going to go out to the streets. No. It normally doesn't happen like that, right? Or I'm behind in my bills. I can't, buy food. I'm going to go out in the streets. No. Normally, it starts with an incident like a vicious police murder, right? Of some unarmed, person, like Black or Latino. Those are the things that bring people out. But the people that are coming out for incidents like that are already charged up because of all those other issues.
Yeah, okay.
So I'm saying because all those other issues are going to become much more intensified in terms of the level of their impoverishment, they're much more likely when they come out to be much more radical and inflamed than when they were coming out for those same police protests in the past. So that's how it normally happens.
Okay.
So you're just so comrade, you're just saying we are reaching an inflection point. We did not reach it with George Floyd, which was an international, response at some point.
Yes.
More in some places more than others. But you're saying
Yes.
that even that did not get us quite to that inflection point, but you think now this is what is going to tip us over? Because
Right.
what
I
keep
think that
seeing
one.
is we get to that point, we protest. I remember my community, and there was an impromptu gathering. Probably had, I would say, at least 3,000 people there.
Yes.
Black people mostly, but others as well. And then come to election time, it was like, hey guys, can we get some people to help knock on doors and so on and so forth? And we couldn't find 50 people. So you're saying this time around they are going to put so much pain, and they're not going to see. Okay, so there are these rats that I used to hear about in Nigeria. I never encountered them personally.
My God.
And someone who's scientifically inclined can maybe put this in the chat if it's true or not. But they said there are these rats who they have something in their saliva or whatever.
We have those rats in Uganda too.
As they're biting,
we have them too.
As they're biting you and eating your body, they're numbing that area as well.
Yep.
So you can sleep through being eaten, having body parts being nibbled and eaten by a rat.
Right.
And I think what the elite, I know what the elite have been very good at doing is giving us these panaceas that temporarily just, calm us down. And so we had George Floyd, and not everybody, some people were up in arms. And then they gave a few dollars here and there. We don't know where the dollars went. We don't say all the DEI programs and things that they came up with, all the wonderful, commentary has disappeared in less than 4 years. In fact, we went all the way back. Now we don't care about police brutality. So it is your belief that this time around we're going to hit that inflection point?
No, sister, actually, ironically, we're on the same page. I'm not even arguing or debating that. We're on the same page of that. Because the alternative would be to say that there will never be an inflection point.
Got you.
Our people will never become conscious. Our people will never struggle. Our people will never, ever say enough is enough. That's the alternative. And I'm just saying, even though I agree with everything you just said, I'm not willing to lose faith in our people.
Yeah.
In the 60s, there were some inflection points in the 60s. And they had to scramble around and do some things to calm down the masses. 68, when you had all those fires in the cities in the United States, they calmed down the people. They did the Kerner Commission and all that stuff. Progressively, at some point, I believe they're going to be faced with a moment, and they're going to have a person like Trump who may not see the need to calm down the masses.
To placate them.
And that's when we'll have the serious problem. That's what I'm saying. But I'm not disagreeing that our people have been too complacent for too long.
So,
and as someone in the chat said, we now have social media revolutionaries. If I share enough things on social media, I've done my part.
I've done my part. But here's my response to that. People did come out to the streets during George Floyd. They did come out.
Mm-hmm. They did.
And the system did what they did in terms of what Walter Rodney said. The system always finds answers.
Yeah.
What were their answers? To make all these promises, right? Start making pledges. I doubt I don't even know, somebody should go back and look at how many percentage of those pledges were actually honored, right? Things died out, and we go back to business as usual. The only thing I'm saying is that, and this is where I go to that wealthy billionaire who said, they think they can always keep the lid down. Those were his words. But there's going to reach a point where they will no longer be able to keep the lid down. And I think I agree with him. And this is a person with vested interest in the system,
But so you said it's more than likely that it's a mass of people, not anyone from the billionaire class that would push against status quo. So it has to be from the outside, not from within. Because usually the crack starts from within. It will start from someone within the inner circle saying, I think we've gone too far, as opposed to someone from the outside. Because how do you know what the stop is? How do you know when you need to push? If you understand what I'm asking.
No, I don't.
Say the
Clarify.
section of the Bill of Rights is to maintain the status quo.
Okay.
And we see that with Mark Cuban, who was very critical
Mm-hmm.
to his, I'll give him some respect for that. He was very critical of Trump and very pro Kamala. But bruh, it didn't take how many minutes? Couple hours?
To talk to you later.
He's like, hey, we know ourselves. Forget what I was saying. We understand ourselves. Let's work.
Yeah.
So what we're saying is, excusing Brother Milton's very wise.
Let me try to introduce another element and see if this works. In South Africa, right?
Okay.
In the 60s at some point, you had European liberals leading the march against apartheid, correct?
Yeah.
When all the ANC leadership had been either exiled or locked up.
True.
Right?
True.
Yet the people who were willing and could make change were the youth. Why were they not coming out to the streets? Black consciousness. Because they were in the background saying these European liberals are pushing the fight for us. They have rage at the system, even though they were not the ones feeling the pain. And that's where Steve Biko made a significant difference.
Okay.
He said, no, why should you be leading our fight for us? We are the victims. We need to lead our struggle. He founded a new organization, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very small in the beginning, but they were in control. The Black students were in the leadership of that organization. And it became very widespread because everybody was feeling the way he was feeling. Black consciousness started mobilizing in a very different way. People started coming out in the streets. People that were never coming out in the streets before. At a very high cost, of course. Led ultimately to the Soweto massacre.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm saying there's a possibility that business as usual, even amongst the people who are suffering, the organizers, the movement leaders, that there could be change. Somebody could say, okay, so the movement for Black Lives, we mobilize so many other people. We come out sometimes in mass numbers. But do we have a political agenda that challenges the system? And if the answer is no, maybe somebody else would come and say, this is what we need to do.
Okay.
And that's somebody could ignite a new following, you see? I think circumstances dictate new leadership.
I'm so glad you're making this point because for me, as I try to understand and study our history, I'm trying to learn what worked, how was it squashed, and what lessons do we learn from that as we move forward. So if you talk about Steve Biko and the Black consciousness movement, and you said it was widespread, which it was at some point, then what happened? How was it quashed? What can we learn from that? So as we create 2.0, 3.0, whatever version of it is, we are learning from our past because our oppressors are constantly fine-tuning what they're doing as well.
True.
But I don't think that we often sit down to do that, if you want to
We
call it
don't.
post-mortem, to
We
figure
do
out,
not.
okay, where did we get caught up and what will we do differently?
I agree with you 100%. We do not. And I recommend Rodney's lecture, Crisis in the Periphery, Africa and the Caribbean. It's on YouTube. And he starts off by saying the system always finds answers.
Yep.
When will we find answers? And that is the question that you're posing. And I agree with you. We don't find answers. We have a Thomas Sankara come, Burkina Faso, revolutionary, starts to change things in the right direction, and he's killed by a so-called deputy at the instigation of imperialism. And then look where Burkina Faso is today. So they eliminate one person, everything unravels completely. Here in the US, young revolutionaries like Fred Hampton, assassinated, things unravel like that. So we need to, I agree with you, find ways. Once we see that we're found a path, the correct path, how do we keep that sustainable even if a few of the leaderships are eliminated. And that's always been the challenge.
I think someone gives us some information that we might want to look at, and that is Ella Baker. Ella Baker was definitely not about you just have one head, so to speak. And of course, they cut off that head, everything dies. But we might want to go back and look at her model and how she was teaching young people. And also understand how patriarchy helped to undercut her and what she was trying to do, because it was threatening. There's so many lessons, but if we don't learn the lessons, we're going to keep repeating our failures, unfortunately.
Speaking of
no, absolutely, which goes to the whole issue. I'm sorry, go ahead, brother.
No, go on, because I was
because I know you have a few articles to cover too, so if we keep we'll never get to the next one.
Your submission.
Well, I was going to say, which goes to the whole issue of the Democratic Party as well, because it enjoys the privilege of being the automatic opposition default, right? So you're opposed to the Republican Party, the explicit, blatant, obnoxious racism that they wear and carry proudly on their shoulders. They display it openly without any fear, because they say that, well, and I mean, on the other hand, the Democratic Party say, well, are they really going to go and embrace the Republican Party with their explicit racism? The answer is no. So we don't have to yield on this and that when it comes to dealing with the Black or the African agenda. And that's a problem as well. There needs to be a way to break that cycle, that dichotomy. And is it the possibility of growing and nurturing a true representative party, no matter how long it takes? Are we going to be permanently locked in that dichotomy, that the default of not wanting to support the Republicans is to embrace the Democratic Party?
Okay. I mean, Europe has learned that lesson from its 1930 experience, to the point where, even if it means you only have two representatives in the House, you still have that voice that people can listen to. And then in course of time, you gather momentum and you build a more broader coalition, or even capture power, as is the case in Holland, where some of the most, most fringe parties, although not fringe in the sense that they're right-wing, but community-based parties, actually in government.
Right.
So it might be a model that the United States might want to look at. So speaking of not learning from past experiences, we go to Al Jazeera for our next story, which is, with Trump win, with Trump win, Africa braces for U.S. aid cuts or uncertainty, but it could force African nations to double down on their shifts from U.S. towards Asia and the Middle East, says analyst. Lamu, Kenya, as the results of the United States presidential election came in on Wednesday, showing that former President Donald Trump had won, relief took hold in more than 11 kilometers, 7 miles away in Uganda's capital, Kampala. The sanctions are gone, the East African country parliamentary speaker, Anita Among, told Parliament, hinting at our expectations of immediate improved ties with the U.S. under Trump. The speaker is one of a series of Ugandan officials who had been barred from entering the United States in recent years because of allegations of human rights violation against them. 4 days after Trump's re-election, Africa is grappling with the prospects of what his second term could mean for the continent. His win over Kamala Harris drew immediate congratulations from African leaders, Egypt's Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, Ethiopia Abiy Ahmed, Nigeria's Bola Tinubu, and South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa, amongst others. Were those quickly reach out to Trump. I mean, when I was reading the story alone, the story writes itself. It's like, show me your friends and I'll tell you who you are. It's like, but a sister, over to you.
What else you want me to say? I think Kimberly in the chat asked, I'm going to paraphrase because I can't find the question immediately. Oh, she says, what does the USA look like to the world, Trump being president? What does the USA look like to African leaders, Trump being president? I think some of our African leaders are feeling really good. He represents everything that they represent. We're going to strong arm people. We're going to disrespect folk. We're going to pad our pockets. And guess what? Now America can't even preach to us anything about democracy. He's a 34-time convicted felon, adjudicated physical sexual assaulter. I mean, all of this stuff. So now it's like everybody come out and do whatever you want. America has no foundation on which to judge anybody. But what further does this mean? Yes, people are going to, just like we see the billionaires doing here, they're going to settle up, to slide up and want to be his friend. They're going to allow themselves to be manipulated for the chance to come to Mar-a-Lago and take pictures and wear the Make America,
play golf
great again. They might beg him to come to Africa and make Africa great again. We definitely are going to see this Christian nationalism and Christian fascism imposed on Africa through this U.S. aid. So it's not just going to be the cuts. And let me just put it this way. The other side did it as well in terms of tying their aid to their particular values. That the Trump administration is going to do it again. So I don't think that this portends well for Africans who do want to be free. I think it further shackles us. And I'm not sure that it is going to bring about, we can talk about, yes, maybe we can move manufacturing to get some companies to move manufacturing to Africa. Just for me, another form of neocolonialism. If we're not the ones who own those manufacturing entities, building that technology for our people, it's just another form of neocolonialism. That's my take on this.
Comrade Milton?
All right, so first of all, the headline goes with that old trope that Africa gets aid from the West. It's complete nonsense. Yeah. Africa does not get aid from the United States or from the West. It is the other way around. It is Africa that has been aiding the United States and Western Europe from the era of enslavement. That was massive aid, correct? At a very high cost to Africans. During colonialism, that was massive aid, injections of free labor resources, and then a captured market for their products. And that is a system that maintains up to date. We're still giving them aid. Anybody can go back and calculate and come up with a number of the billions of dollars in aid that Africa gives to the United States, to the West, and to China and many other countries. Because when they steal our products at practically for free, negligible, the amount that they pay for it is negligible compared to its true value and compared to relative to, they then use our products to quote unquote manufacture. They just run it, the same thing, through factories and sell it back to us at prices that are exponentially 10, 20, 50 times the value of what we sold to them or what they stole from us. So that narrative has to end. Al Jazeera is normally very progressive compared to all the other major corporate media. So they need to get away from this, nonsense that these countries are actually aiding Africa. It is the other way around. Once Africa stops aiding all these countries, that's when development will start occurring in Africa. And the second point I'd also like to make, people should remember that some of the most costly, bloody wars that have killed so many Africans, like in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, in South Sudan, in Rwanda, either initiated during Democratic administrations in the White House or continued and escalated during Democratic Party administration. So to me, it doesn't necessarily translate that a Trump presidency is going to be much worse for Africa than it's already been under the Democratic Party administration.
Okay. I would also like to add to answer Kimberly's question. Actually, there is an article on the internet. It's titled "The New Colonialism." It's penned by Mark Cortez under War waronwants.com. Waronwants.com. It's titled The New Colonialism. It gives you a breakdown country by country what they gave up to the West in terms of raw materials and what they got back in terms of aid. I'll give you an example. So essentially, Britain, the development department, issues out this bulletin every year. And Britain's aid to the world to Africa in total is about 25 million, the Department of Aid. And in this article...
Million or billion?
Million.
Oh my God, that's like peanuts.
And in this article, all the companies that are based in Africa, extracting resources from Africa, even in Western Sahara, that is disputed territory, took out a total in the year 2017, 198 billion
pounds.
That's B, a capital B. So
there you go.
For Africans.
Yeah. So that's one of the things we need to start challenging, these false narratives, and the words they use.
And there is another point I wanted to add with regards to Trump in particular. Is whispers making the round that Trump is anti-war or everything. There was a report issued by the Bureau of Investigative Journalism based in the UK here, which says Trump revoked Obama's rule on reporting on drone strikes. So the CIA under Obama had to declare what they did with regards to drone strike. So he revoked that 2016 executive order. Trump, in his first 2 years alone, signed off on 2,243 drone strikes. We're not counting collateral damage. That is just for those drones to go out and pop people. So if they pop villages, pop families, it doesn't really matter. And that beats Obama's in 8 years, 1,878. So in 2 years alone, the guy surpasses what Obama did in the entire 8 years.
Yes, but not let's forget what Obama did to Libya.
Yeah, I mean, yes, but, so to...
That was colossal compared to, what... And you know what? And of course, we are telling you the reasons why we are totally opposed to his presidency, Trump's presidency, and the outcome of this election. At the same time, I said my position always been, my default is not to compare and say, what did the Democrats do? Yep. Were they much better? No, the Democrats were very destructive when it comes to Africa and warfare. The whole of West Africa, Northern Africa, Central Africa has now been impacted by the destruction of the Libyan state under a democratic administration. And also the second thing, look at how much money the Democrats have sent to Ukraine. Billions of dollars, while social programs are being cut, particularly in communities that are most impacted, communities of color. So I totally oppose that as well. And if he's going to insist that Ukraine and Russia get behind the table and negotiate an end to that war, I support that. Absolutely.
I mean, the thing is, American policy, regardless of the United States sitting president, rolls on.
Exactly.
The military machine, industrial complex, you will get you to do something, one way or the other.
And ironically, it was a Republican president who warned about the military-industrial complex, Eisenhower. And if anybody has not heard that speech, it's on YouTube, He said the military-industrial complex is going to capture the U.S. state. And exactly that's what happened,
So, we're coming to the close of this week's episode of African News Review. And Sister Aya, any famous last words? Hopefully we get you on maybe just after he takes power and begin to see what begins to unfold in terms of the space.
Yeah, so I'm not caping for either the Republicans or the Democrats. I'm caping for our common humanity. I'm caping for the liberation of African peoples. And what I see with one of the biggest dangers of this particular incoming regime is the Christian fascism. And when we look at Christian nationalism or Islamic nationalism, when we look at any of these religious formations across the world,
Yep.
they have never been kind to people. So whether we talk about Francoists in Spain, 1939 to 1975, whether we talk about Nazi Germany, whether we talk about Mussolini, whether we're looking at the current Russian Federation and the Russian Orthodox Church, whether we look at the Taliban, whether we look at Iran, whether we look at even Pakistan or Sudan, what you find is the masses of people being impoverished, being crushed. What we find is women going back in time and losing their rights and their liberties. And that is one of the biggest concerns. And, you know, in terms of some quote unquote good that they may do, or whether he goes and stops this war in Ukraine or not, I'm going to end with this. I have a rooster. I have hens, but I also have one rooster. He's a bully. I'm not trying to raise chicken. I raise the chicken just for the eggs, right? So I'm not trying to have the eggs fertilized and more chicks hatch and all of that, because I don't have a farm yet. This rooster is loud. He's brash. I think he's a bully. I am currently feeding that rooster very well. And the rooster likes me. But I'm feeding that rooster because I am fattening that rooster up for my Kwanzaa celebration. So when I look at Trump and any incidental thing that he may do that may be beneficial somehow to people, I'm looking at what the intent is of this sociopath, the psychopath. And it is not for your good. You may be getting something in the interim, but like my rooster, your end is near. So if that rooster was smart, the next time I let him out, he might just fly over the fence and take his chances out there. But right now, he's very happy being fed by me. And we need to be very careful as a people. And
don't be
it's
roosters.
Time to organize for real. It really is time to organize across borders. The time is now.
Yeah, and thank you, Brother Milton.
Yeah, I think to me, when I look back, the saddest realization is that we are a captive of the two-party system, the Republicans and the Democrats. And the late Julius Nyerere was correct in 1985 when he said the United States and the rest of the world would be a much better place if the U.S. had a genuine opposition party. He said both of them are imperialist and both of them are capitalists. And therein lies the major problem. None of them can address the serious social issues that our communities are really bedeviled with. The vision is not the vision that we actually aspire to be honest with you.
Well,
Tan Clan, cream, castles, everything around me.
Well, I would end with the words of Thomas Sankara when he said, "Those who feed you control you." So people, try not to be roosters. And so we've come to the end, and thank you all for coming through. And again, I have to extend my warm regards to Brother Milton and Sister Aya for coming through today. In spite of the sorrow mood in your part of the world, we're looking, but we hope for the best. We hope for the best. And thank you for coming through.
Brother.
Thank you.
And for our viewers, if this is your first time, do like, share, subscribe. Yeah, subscribe. We're trying to get the numbers to 1,000 so that YouTube can, spin the wheel for this channel. Please share and each one bring one. Each one bring one. That's the best way to say it. Each one bring one. And yes, thank you all for coming through. And until next week, it is Odi. That's a wrap for this week on the African News Review podcast. We hope you are leaving with a clearer, more truthful picture of Africa. Remember, every story has another side, and we're here to uncover it. Don't forget to join us next Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we continue to challenge the narratives and reclaim Africa's voice. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep seeing Africa for what it truly is.